Good afternoon and welcome to the Executive Elevation Experience with me, Shireen Motara. I'm an executive coach and consultant, and I'm so happy to be joined by Professor Anita Bosch. We've met previously, and I'm really impressed by her work. And of course, she does work that's close to my heart. Thanks, Anita, for joining me today.
Thank you so much for the invitation, Shireen. Always great to chat to you.
Thank you. So we have about 30 minutes to have a sort of meaningful conversation. I'd really want to tap into, the work that you do around women's leadership, but also to hear a little bit more about your leadership journey. So why don't we start by you telling me a little bit about who you are, your background, and what you do for a living?
Right, so at the moment I'm working at the Stellenbosch Business School. I'm teaching in the leadership and organizational behavior tracks, and I hold a research chair for women at work. I was not always in academia. I've been in academia for quite some time. At the moment the majority part of my career, but earlier on in my 20s I was in industry doing all kinds of consulting work in human resources. I was a payroll clerk and also worked as a junior bookkeeper in a powder coating factory. So I had some interesting workplace experiences and was also a leader at different levels there. That's in terms of my career. And yes, I don't know what else you would like to know about that, Cherie.
Thanks so much, Anita. That's interesting. I've always just thought of you as an academic. I didn't know the other background. So thanks for sharing that. So tell me why you then chose academia.
Well, in a way, sort of academia chose me. I think in many ways, not in terms of people choosing me, but I was always fascinated as a child about the notion of business, doing good business. How do you make money? What does it mean to trade? I was always fascinated by that, and that also drove my subject choices at school. And so ended up and initially wanted to open a bakery. That was one of the things that I was enrolled for that after school, and then looked at what some of my friends were doing and said to myself, and when I think back on this now, I think the importance of mental models and how we're influenced around those mental models. And at that stage, my mental model was that if I go and do that, then I'll become, listen to this bad mental model, I'll become lazy and I won't go and study. And I mean, how limited that is, because having a bakery and owning a bakery is most certainly not somebody that's lazy. It's very hard work.
Yes.
Um, and so yes, I didn't go that route, and I started with a BCom degree. And did BCom accounts. So that was sort of how I started, and eventually later on, I was doing some work in a consulting sphere and did some adjunct teaching work in my 20s, and because of that started getting to know the systems of academia, how it works. And then there was an opportunity to run a for-profit unit at the university. And so at that stage, I never dreamt of being a professor. I didn't dream about having a PhD. I did think about wanting an MBA. That was something earlier on in my career, purely because I wanted to understand more about business. Um, and so when the opportunity came up to move over and lead a for-profit unit, that's when I thought, wow, this is quite interesting. It's something different. I've not really dealt with it, and that's how I stepped into university, but not yet into a full academic position. And it's taken me quite some time to get into a full-time, more permanent, traditional academic position.
And of course, we know that the academic environment is quite male dominated, especially at the professor level. What has your journey been to getting to that level? and what can you share with other women who are on that trajectory?
Yeah, I think, mentorship is sorely lacking, and I certainly did not ever have a formal mentor, in my journey. It was never
Mm-hmm.
offered by the institutions that I worked for. um, I kind of had to find my way. And as I say, I entered through the back door in many instances,
Mm-hmm.
and running a for profit, and had lots of fun doing that, and learned many, many things, and worked with incredible people. Um, but at that point, the head of department noticed what I was doing, and then said, well, there's a need to set up an HR route, a pathway for study from first year up to PhD, and wouldn't I be
Mm-hmm.
interested in setting that up? But it was only after I had shown what I can do. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's so
Mm-hmm.
important to get into the door, I think, in any form of or shape, whether it's adjunct teaching or marking work,
Mm-hmm.
or being, part of groups that develop courses or think about new content or ways of delivering things, or things that are more relevant to the current students out there. And I mean, our
Mm-hmm.
students, Shireen, you would know, are people like ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
but also people that are much younger. So it's like the full gambit of age groups and generations. And so I think sometimes just people that are interested and think about things, and then partner with people that open doors. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so that's been one of the things that I've tried to do throughout my career. Is a door was open for me. It was open a little bit, and I jumped at the opportunity, and then sort of worked my way up a lot. I
Mm-hmm.
think that has been a mainstay. I've really always worked incredibly hard, and also realized where I've had privilege, and tried to use that also then to open doors for other individuals to come in.
And in our earlier conversation, you were talking about how you still work hard, how we still have to work hard, where we are now. Tell me a little bit about, in that working hard, how do you take care of yourself?
I'm not particularly good at that, Shireen. So I know, and we know all the theory, and we teach it as well.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I do know that I'm much better at is realizing when I really, really need to stop and ask for help. So I'm better at asking help these days than
Mm-hmm.
what I was previously, and recognizing sort of when I really, really get tired, and when I have to preserve some energy. So for the longest time, I've been trying to really be much more mindful about myself,
Mm-hmm.
in relation to all of the people that I need to service, and that, I think, is something that, one could say it's responsible leaders, but most probably more self-aware leaders. We
Mm-hmm.
might know about it, but not necessarily how then to help ourselves. So um,
Yes.
I think one of the most important things there is to recognize when you get tired, and then the second thing is to ask for help then, and not to
Mm-hmm.
be too proud, or to be fearful that it will be perceived as being weak. And those are things. That's a journey, and I'm still on that pathway. It's
Mm-hmm.
not something that I think you conquer once and it's a tick
Yes.
box. I think it is a process. It continues.
And I think what I want to add to that is the idea of boundaries. So that's also one of the ways in which we take care of ourselves. I was listening to a podcast this morning, and this woman was saying there are three C's to boundaries. So the one is your calendar, the second is your communication, and the third is your clients or your colleagues. So, if you think about about boundaries and you don't know where to start, look at those three areas and see what you can do to help yourself. And for me, definitely, I use my calendar to create boundaries. So I set times when I'm available and when I'm not. And that helps me then, make time for me to focus either on working on my business, building networks, or taking care of myself. So definitely, I think we all have work to do in that area, but every little bit helps.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, that's fascinating advice. That's very helpful
Mm-hmm.
advice. It
Mm-hmm.
also makes it possible for one to remember it. And
Yes.
yeah, I must say, I'm quite, I always joke, I say, but I'm always very time positive. I always underestimate how long things will take me to do.
Yes. Yes.
But I think I'm a bit of a perfectionist as well. And so that doesn't
Mm-hmm.
always help.
Yeah, no, don't worry. We're on the same level there. What I always think about is what someone said to me once was that if you plan an hour for something that you think you're going to need, just add another hour onto it, and at least you're creating a little room for yourself because
Yeah.
you're always underestimating that.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Anita, so you are the research chair around women and work. Tell us a little bit about that. Firstly, how did you get into that role? And what do you do?
Yes, Shireen, I think what's really important about careers is that you have to make opportunities for yourself. I think it is wonderful if you're in an environment where the organization's leaders think about your career the whole time and make it their job to make things happen for you.
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, also those leaders have a whole big host of things that they need to take care of, and I think it's kind of unfortunate that we're stuck in that paradigm of thinking that, or hoping that they will see us and do things
Mm-hmm.
for us.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Mm-hmm.
think a lot of the things that have happened in my career, I've thought of and then made plans to get there and then elicited help or asked for permission, sometimes even not asking for permission, but asking for forgiveness afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
And that has pretty much been the way that I've moved forward. So I've set very high standards for myself. And I also look at what other people are achieving, not in a way that I become destructive towards myself if I'm not whatever it is that I'm viewing. But in academia, there's quite a few excellent examples of people that have done well, that do good work, and also then understanding some of the organizational mechanisms to help you to get there. So the
Mm-hmm.
chair was one of those things that I've witnessed at other institutions. America's particularly good at this, that they have endowed chairs where families make endowments, and based on that endowment, the chair continues and is able to survive. In South
Mm-hmm.
Africa, we don't have such a strong culture of that type of funding, and I think also the current generation may also not be as familiar with that and willing necessarily. I think there's other ways that giving's done instead of
Mm-hmm.
financial giving towards a chair as such, um, and so that makes it quite difficult to find funding for these types of things.
Mm-hmm.
But what I do remember very distinctly is when I moved between institutions, that the discussion for me about joining a new institution was not so much, yes, there's peripheral things and the things that you always check box about whether it's a good institution and the reputation and the people that you'll be
Mm-hmm.
working with, but it was very much about negotiating that I did not want to continue with the same type of work and the same trajectory that I had had at the previous institution, and really wanted to move forward. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so, in a sense, I negotiated these things at the onset, and I set the scene for myself as well. So I sort of it was kind of a pep talk that I had to have with myself. Did I want to
Mm-hmm.
do another 10 years of what I had done in the past, doing good work, but repeating that, or did I want to set a new pathway? And I decided on the latter one, and then negotiated that very strongly. And so the
Mm-hmm.
chair developed from that, also with a lot of failure in it. And I think that's the other thing. I've had a lot of failure in my career. And I think when people witness your career, they just see the good things because that's what's
Mm-hmm.
celebrated. But the times that I've had to redo things, re-ask, beg for things, and get no's for answer are multiple, many more than when I got a
Mm-hmm.
yes. And I think
Mm-hmm.
it was. it's just sort of each time. Sometimes it hits you very hard and you
Yes.
feel you don't want to go back. But sometimes you just know it's, it becomes sort of, it's part of the process, and you've just got
Mm-hmm.
to catch your breath again, and then try again.
Sure. And I think as women, we need to be ready for those no's because, as you say, they are multiple and they are ongoing throughout our careers. But what I'm also hearing from you is that it's, take your motivation and take ownership of your life and craft your own path and then seek for support in crafting that path because no
Yeah.
one's going to do it for you. And of
Yeah.
course, failure is a necessary part of that journey and it helps us to go better and bigger. So I'm a
Yeah.
believer of that because I'm a risk taker and I believe failing is necessary for a better way forward. So thanks so much for sharing that. Um, Tell us a little bit about your work. So you do a work around women and work. I've seen that you've done research on women on boards. You've done research on women on the continent, not just in South Africa. You've done research on the pay gap. And you told me earlier about the research you've done around celebrating Black women's excellence. I'd like us to talk a little about each of those, but let's start perhaps with your research on women and work and the gender pay gap. Tell us a little bit about what you
Yeah.
are finding and where are we now.
Yeah, so maybe just a step back, is the Women at
Mm-hmm,
Work name came from the focus that I wanted the chair to have, to not necessarily only focus on women leaders, because a
mm-hmm,
lot of things are being done for women leaders,
mm-hmm,
but it's us, the women that get up every morning, get yourself ready, get
mm-hmm,
multiple other members of households very often ready for their days, and then step into wherever you need to go, the car to go to work, or whether you're
mm-hmm,
fortunate enough to work from home or wherever it is. So I really wanted to focus on what I term the everyday woman, and to bring some meaning and a bit of a highlight to understanding more about us, going to work. And so
mm-hmm,
I know that that us is very big and large, and that there are multiple types within that us. And so one area that I did, and I continue to do with some of my studies, a lot of my students, a lot of work on, is women blue collar workers, because
mm-hmm,
that's a completely understudied area. And there we find we're doing very interesting work. I'm working with a colleague from Fleric University, Smaranda Boros, and we're doing work there to find out more about the identity crafting journey of women in male dominated industries, because
mm-hmm,
usually blue collar workers, a lot of women work in male dominated environments. So the women on boards part developed really because of an access to data. And
mm-hmm,
initially, I really actually didn't want to do a lot of work on women on boards, because I felt there's a lot of emphasis on that level,
mm-hmm,
although there's still a lot of work that needs to be done, but many researchers focus on it. But I soon realized that access to data actually makes it, one of the areas for one to do quite a lot of very interesting studies. And so that's how those projects commenced. With regards to the gender pay gap, again, that focuses on everybody, right?
mm-hmm,
Um, and you asked, how are we faring? So the studies, the econometric studies that are done on that, still talks about between 23 and 30% gap, depending on where you are in the pay distribution. And but one of the good pieces of news there is that for women in the lower parts of the pay distribution, the minimum wage has been really, really great, because that has closed to a large extent the gap. Um,
mm-hmm,
but it is, for the rest of us, there's unfortunately still a gap, and where in the very high levels of of the pay distribution, the high percentiles, there where very senior women were, the gap seemed to be closing after the dawn of democracy. In the past 10 years, it's been widening again, and there should not be an
mm-hmm,
explanation for it. There's no logical explanation for it that we can find. And certainly Jacqueline Mosomi of UCT has done phenomenal work there. with econometric studies. So it's still a mixed bag. And then multiple studies, you'll find it really depends on what data you're looking at and
Mm-hmm.
what you can find there. Industry, the work in the United States still is a big indicator of whether you'll have a big difference
Mm-hmm.
in pay. So if you work in a male dominated industry, in typical male dominated work, then in general, women experience lower pay than their male colleagues. Um, and it is up to the companies. Our acts are very good, our legislation is very good, but it's
Mm-hmm.
up to the companies to make that happen. Together, I think, with a bit of nudging from activist groups
Mm-hmm.
and good research, and then the individuals that step into those jobs.
Yes. Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, I do a lot of work in that space as well. So, it just depresses me every time I have to see that, for example, on the JSE listed companies, we have 15% top management women, and then on the other across South Africa, it's less than 30%. And we've had employment equity legislation since 1998. And, one is at a loss as to explain what needs to happen.
Mm,
But linked to that, of course, what we're seeing is that, when women are trying to advance into these positions, it often seems that women think it's their responsibility to fix themselves so they can be, they can be recognized or be promoted and so on. And I've seen with some of my coaching clients and people in my network that often women feel, okay, I need to go get another degree or I need another qualification or what course can I do now? What is your advice around that? Because I think sometimes it's not necessary. I had a coaching client who wanted to move into another area of work. She had a master's already and then went to do a second master's because she thought she needed that master's, irrespective of her work experience, to get into that role. What are you learning about that from the work that you are doing and from what you are seeing also in the academic environment?
Yeah, I think, a good qualification, because there are many
Mm-hmm.
qualifications that you can do,
Mm-hmm.
and some of them are poorer quality than others. But a good qualification is always a good thing. But I want to add there that, as in with the example that you're giving now of this woman wanting to move into another field, we underestimate the power of just
Mm-hmm.
reading, doing internet searches, chatting to people, and figuring your way out. Because a lot of what gets done at senior levels, based on a particular field that you're in, can be transferred into other areas.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't necessarily, unless it's a highly technical aspect. I always say, I don't want to have a surgeon
Mm-hmm.
that hasn't done the grafting and
Yeah.
has the qualifications and all of the years experience, right? And similarly, I don't want to have an accountant that's doing my books or my taxes that
Mm-hmm.
really has not done the groundwork. um, but in saying that, if I have an accountancy background and I've done my groundwork in one field and I want to move over to another field that has links to my field, but perhaps is slightly different, then I think there's many things that I can transfer and I can pick
Mm-hmm.
up from reading, really just reading. I find with male business leaders, the interviews that I've done with many of them, is that they read widely. The really good leaders that are become compassionate and informed and
Mm-hmm.
come up with seemingly great ideas, those great ideas often come from reading multiple books and then
Mm-hmm.
combining stuff into new ideas. And then also having very good company. So choosing who you mix with,
Mm-hmm.
not mixing with the same groups the whole time, and actually reaching out and doing that. And I was reminded about that yesterday because I had a great meeting with somebody that was a previous student, but that had reached out to me. And just thinking about working from home and how insular one gets after a while,
Mm-hmm.
and how important it is to actually reach out and meet up with other people and get to hear about what they're doing or how they're just thinking, what they're thinking about particular issues, and then rejigging, nudging your own thoughts around those ideas.
Yeah, thanks for that. And linked to that, what would you say to women who are looking at, navigating this leadership journey in their own spaces, often male-dominated spaces, in terms of, them taking specific action? What would you recommend for them to do in terms of, advancing in leadership based on your own journey and your experience with the research?
Yeah. I think there's two things. It really depends on the environment in which you at. So younger men, when you're at the same age as men in the younger years, and I'd say younger years is like up to 40 years old, and perhaps just pushing slightly over 40. I've noticed that there's an incredible amount of competition, and you're likely to get pushback. So if the men in the group are the same age as you and you're in that band and you're trying to climb the ladder, they view you as supreme competition. You will also be labeled as somebody that can get in more easily because you're a woman. If you're a black woman, on top of it's doubly, you're supposed to get in quite easily. And that notion that they'll say that to you, even sometimes to your face. And so it's that competition that's occurring between individuals for a type of a scarce, there's only a few positions. What I noticed in my career in that phase is if you reach out and you form a strong relationship with another male, but that is most likely 55 and over that age, in positions, those men no longer feel threatened by you. And often they are the ones that start opening up the doors. They will give you an opportunity. They will give you advice if you ask for for that advice. But again, you've got to prove yourself in some way that you would, bring your work. So don't just ask for something to be done, but first do something, bring your work to them, ask them to give input on it, critique it even, ask for advice. And in that way, they get to know you, and often they are the individuals that hold the keys to opening doors. When you push over 50, the dynamic starts changing slightly in the sense that you're not viewed as such a big threat any longer, um, and people start treating you slightly differently. So I found that age is one of the issues that causes a lot of trouble for women moving up the ranks. If there are no men that are older in the area where you move up, you have to really build alliances with those men that are in your grouping. If you fail to build those alliances, they are going to continue viewing you as high levels of competition, or a highly competitive person, and then you will struggle to move upwards.
Thanks for that. It's enlightening, but it's also a bit scary in the sense that, it's still women who have to do a lot of work in order to advance themselves. And we often have to be the ones seeking out the support and so on. And we hope that organizations are more and more are understanding that, and also creating spaces to be more supportive to women. I think there's a lot happening. But still a lot more to be done. I wish we had more time to talk a lot more about this, Anita, but thank you so much for making the time to be with me and for sharing some of your insights as well as your own experiences. I hope it has helped all of you to get some insight on another woman's leadership journey, and in a different space. And also, if you have any questions or thoughts, please share them with us. If you have any questions for Anita, share them with us, and we will share that with her as well. Thank you for making the time to be with us this afternoon. Thank you so much, Anita. We appreciate you making the time to be with us.
Thank you so much, Shireen. And the work that you're doing is fantastic. Please keep up with it. And I hope to speak to you soon again.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Have a good weekend. Bye.
Bye bye.